Chapter 1. The Hill That Changed History. There is a hill in southeastern Turkey that was never meant to exist. For 12,000 years, it slept beneath its own dust, hiding the first architecture of the human soul. In October 1994, a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt stood on a dusty hilltop in southeastern Turkey, squinting against the sun. The locals called it Göbekli Tepe, Potbelly Hill, a gentle, rounded summit rising 50 feet above the surrounding landscape near the ancient city of Urfa. Earlier surveyors had dismissed the broken limestone slabs scattered across the summit as Byzantine gravestones. Nothing special. Another unremarkable cemetery in a region thick with ruins. But Klaus Schmidt saw something different. The shape of the hill itself stood out. Unlike the stark, flat plateaus nearby, this summit had an unnaturally smooth curve. Only man could have created something like this, Schmidt would later say. It was clear right away this was a gigantic Stone Age site. He was right. But he couldn't have imagined just how gigantic, or how impossible. Schmidt returned in 1995 with 5 colleagues. They began to dig, and within days they unearthed something that would force archaeologists around the world to rewrite human history. Massive T-shaped pillars, standing in circles, covered in carvings. The pillars were enormous, up to 18 feet tall, weighing as much as 16 tons each. They were arranged in perfect rings, with 2 massive central pillars surrounded by smaller stones, all facing inward like prehistoric board meetings frozen in time. The carvings were extraordinary. Snakes coiling across the limestone, foxes prowling, birds in flight, scorpions with raised stingers. The detail was so precise, so lifelike, that the animals seemed ready to leap from the stone. And then came the carbon dating. 11,600 years old. To put that in perspective, Göbekli Tepe was built 7,000 years before the Great Pyramid of Giza, 6,000 years before Stonehenge, before pottery, before the wheel, before written language, before agriculture. According to everything archaeologists thought they knew about human civilization, the people who built Göbekli Tepe shouldn't have been able to build anything at all. Here was a massive temple complex, the world's first cathedral on a hill, as Schmidt called it, built by people who had no farms, no villages, no pottery, no metal tools, just stone, wood, and an impossible vision. Schmidt found no evidence of permanent settlement on the summit. No cooking hearths, no houses, no trash pits, no clay fertility figurines that litter other sites of the same age. This wasn't a village. This wasn't a settlement. This was a destination. Using ground-penetrating radar and geomagnetic surveys, Schmidt mapped the entire summit. The results were staggering. At least 16 more megalith rings buried across 22 acres. The excavations so far, covering less than 5% of the site, had only scratched the surface. Archaeologists could dig here for another 50 years, Schmidt said, and barely scratch the surface. Standing among those ancient pillars, Schmidt understood he had discovered something more than just old stones. He had found evidence that challenged the very foundation of how we understood the birth of civilization. But Mysteries breed more mysteries. Who were these people? How did hunter-gatherers organize the labor force needed to quarry, transport, and erect these massive stones? Where did they come from? And most puzzling of all, why did they build it? Schmidt would spend the rest of his life trying to answer those questions. Every spring and fall, he returned to the dusty hilltop, leading his team in their careful excavations. He even bought a house in nearby Urfa, making Turkey his second home. The sight consumed him. "As soon as I got there and saw the stones," he once admitted, "I knew that if I didn't walk away immediately, I would be there for the rest of my life." In a 2011 interview, Schmidt estimated that roughly 5% of the site had been excavated. 5%! And already it had rewritten history. On July 20th, 2014, Klaus Schmidt died suddenly of a heart attack while swimming in Germany. He was 60 years old. His wife, Turkish archaeologist Çiğdem Köksal Schmidt, was left to carry on his work. The hill had indeed claimed him for life, but he never got to see what lay beneath the other 95%. Today, Göbekli Tepe is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, recognized as one of the first manifestations of human-made monumental architecture. Visitors from around the world stand where Schmidt once stood, gazing at those massive pillars, trying to comprehend the impossible. Because the deeper you dig into Göbekli Tepe, the stranger it gets. Those hunter-gatherers who supposedly couldn't organize large-scale construction projects, they not only built this massive complex, they built it with geometric precision. Those pillars aren't randomly arranged. Recent studies have revealed a hidden pattern. The three oldest enclosures, B, C, and D, are linked by a plan based on an equilateral triangle. Each enclosure was part of a single, unified project, requiring 3 times more manpower than previously thought. A single project, a master plan, executed with precision. How did people without agriculture, without permanent settlements, without any prior tradition of monumental building, suddenly develop the knowledge to create something like this? It's like discovering your toddler built a fusion reactor in the sandbox while you weren't looking. And we haven't even gotten to the really strange part yet. The astronomical alignments, the deliberate burial, the cosmic catastrophe some believe it commemorates. But first, we need to understand what we thought we knew about human development, and why Göbekli Tepe demolishes it completely. Chapter 2. Before agriculture. Before everything. For over a century, archaeologists operated on a simple, logical model of human development. It was called the Neolithic Revolution, and it went like this. Step 1. Hunter-gatherers discover agriculture around 10,000 BC. Step 2. Agriculture provides stable food supply, allowing permanent settlements. Step 3. Surplus food frees people from farming. Specialization emerges. Step 4. Specialists create art, architecture, religion, and eventually, civilization. Simple. Logical. Wrong. Göbekli Tepe doesn't just challenge this model, it obliterates it. The site dates to approximately 9,600 BC, right at the dawn of the Neolithic period. But there's no evidence of agriculture. No domesticated plants. No domesticated animals, just wild species. gazelles, wild cattle, wild boar. The people who built Göbekli Tepe were still hunting and gathering. And yet, they created this. To understand how impossible this is, you need to grasp the scale of what building Göbekli Tepe required. Each T-shaped pillar was quarried from bedrock using only stone tools. The largest pillars weigh up to 16 tons. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the weight of 3 elephants, carved from solid limestone, transported uphill, and erected vertically with precision. In 1970, explorer Thor Heyerdahl conducted experiments moving massive Moai statues on Easter Island. Based on his findings, moving a single pillar of Göbekli Tepe's size would have required 50 to 75 people working for an entire week, just to move it 15 kilometers. And Göbekli Tepe has hundreds of pillars. Schmidt cited a 1917 account from the Indonesian island of Nias, where moving a single megalith required 525 people working for 3 days. Let's do the math. If Göbekli Tepe contains at least 200 pillars across its 16 enclosures, and each pillar required several hundred workers, you're looking at a labor force of thousands. But here's the problem. Hunter-gatherer societies don't have thousands of people to spare. They operate in small, mobile bands, typically 25 to 50 individuals. They follow game. They migrate with the seasons. They don't stay in one place long enough to quarry, carve, and erect massive monuments. So how did this happen? Klaus Schmidt proposed a radical idea. Göbekli Tepe wasn't built by a local community. It was built by multiple groups coming together for communal projects, seasonal gatherings where various hunter-gatherer bands met to worship, feast, and build. This was humanity's first cathedral on a hill, Schmidt argued. Like medieval Christians traveling to build a great cathedral, these prehistoric people journeyed from across the region to contribute to something larger than themselves. But that raises even more questions. What motivated them? What kind of religious or symbolic system could inspire such devotion? And how did they organize the logistics? And then there's the most baffling detail. They had the knowledge and skill to do it. The pillars aren't just big, they're sophisticated. The T-shape itself is architecturally significant, providing structural stability. The circular enclosures show understanding of geometry and spatial planning. The carvings demonstrate artistic skill far beyond what we'd expect from primitive hunter-gatherers. Some of the animals carved into the pillars are rendered with such anatomical accuracy that modern zoologists can identify the exact species. The snakes aren't just snake-shaped. They're specific species native to the region. The foxes have detailed fur patterns. The birds have individually carved feathers. This is not crude. This is mastery. And there's more. Recent research has revealed that the 3 main enclosures, B, C, and D, were planned together as a single project, linked by an equilateral triangle design. This means someone conceived of the entire complex before construction began. Gil Hockley and Avi Gopher, archaeologists studying Göbekli Tepe's geometry, wrote in 2020, "The planning and execution of the plan with accuracy were made possible by conceptualizing basic geometric ideas and methods, such as circle, center, and compass arm. Think about what that means. Not only did these people have the manpower and motivation to build Göbekli Tepe, they had architects, they had engineers, they had a system of mathematical knowledge sophisticated enough to design monumental structures. According to the old model, they shouldn't have had any of those things. The more you study Göbekli Tepe, the more it looks like something is missing from our understanding of prehistory. Some piece of the puzzle we haven't found yet. Or maybe, and this is where things get controversial, something we've lost entirely. Schmidt himself noted the paradox. This area was like a paradise, he said, describing the landscape 11,000 years ago. The region sat at the northern edge of the Fertile Crescent, with wild wheat and barley growing in rippling fields, herds of gazelle roaming freely, rivers attracting migrating waterfowl. Fruit and nut trees dotted the hillsides. Why would people living in such abundance suddenly devote enormous energy to building a temple complex? Schmidt believed Göbekli Tepe might have been the cause of agriculture, not the result of it. The need to feed the large gatherings of workers, he argued, pushed people to cultivate wild grains and eventually domesticate them. First came the temple, then the city, Schmidt famously said, reversing the conventional wisdom. But even that explanation feels incomplete. Because Göbekli Tepe isn't just architecturally advanced, it's astronomically sophisticated. The site is located on the highest point of the Jurmuş mountain range, with clear views in nearly every direction. Standing there, you can see for miles, a natural observatory. And those circular enclosures? They're not randomly oriented. Several researchers have noted that the pillars align with significant celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, and most intriguingly, specific star patterns. The most famous pillar at Göbekli Tepe is Pillar 43 in Enclosure D, often called the Vulture Stone. It's covered with animals, a scorpion, birds, a headless human figure. For years, archaeologists debated what these symbols meant. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis published a controversial paper arguing that the animals on Pillar 43 aren't just decorative, they're constellations. They matched the animals to star patterns in the sky and calculated when those constellations would have appeared in the positions shown on the pillar. The date they arrived at, 10,950 BC, give or take 250 years. Now that date is interesting for a specific reason. Because 10,950 BC is right around the time something catastrophic happened to the Earth. An event that changed the climate, triggered mass extinctions, and may have devastated human populations worldwide. It's called the Younger Dryas Impact Event, and Pillar 43 might be commemorating it. But before we dive into cosmic catastrophes and lost civilizations, there's one more mystery we need to address, arguably the strangest one of all. After 1,000 years of use, after generations of hunter-gatherers traveling from across the region to build and maintain this magnificent temple complex, they buried it. Chapter 3. The Deliberate Burial. Imagine spending 1,000 years building a cathedral. Massive stone pillars, intricate carvings, a sacred site that defines your culture, your identity, your connection to the cosmos. Now imagine carefully, deliberately, filling it all in with rubble and dirt until it's completely hidden beneath a hill. That's exactly what happened at Göbekli Tepe. For decades, this was one of the site's greatest mysteries. When Klaus Schmidt first excavated the enclosures, he found them filled with massive amounts of rubble, fist-sized chunks of limestone mixed with archaeological artifacts, animal bones, and stone tools. The fill wasn't natural erosion. It wasn't the gradual accumulation of wind-blown debris over millennia. The stratigraphy, the layers of sediment, showed something very different. This was intentional. The enclosures had been deliberately packed with rubble, sealed away, and built over. Lower structures were buried, and new ones erected on top. Layer after layer, the site grew upward, each generation building on the entombed temples of their ancestors. Schmidt was convinced this was a sacred act, a ritual closing, a way of retiring the temples when they were no longer in use. But the question remained, why? Why would you bury something that took so much effort to build? Several theories have emerged. Theory 1, desanctification. Perhaps, after centuries of use, the temples became too sacred, so charged with spiritual power that they needed to be deactivated to protect future generations from accidentally violating them. Think of it like the Holy of Holies in the ancient Jewish temple, a space so sacred that only the high priest could enter and only once a year. If Göbekli Tepe held similar significance, burying it might have been a way to ensure no one would unwittingly desecrate it. Theory 2, religious revolution, another possibility. A new religion emerged, and the old temples had to be destroyed or hidden. Throughout history, conquering religions have demolished the sacred sites of their predecessors. Maybe Göbekli Tepe was buried to make way for new beliefs. Theory 3, taboo or trauma. What if something terrible happened at Göbekli Tepe? An event so catastrophic that the site became associated with tragedy, making it taboo? The burial would then be an act of closure, sealing away the memory of something too painful to remember. Theory 4, preservation. Paradoxically, burial is one of the best ways to preserve something. By filling the enclosures with rubble, the builders protected the pillars from weathering and vandalism. Perhaps they intended for future generations to rediscover them. But Schmidt believed there was something else going on, something deeper. He noticed that Göbekli Tepe wasn't alone. Similar practices appeared at other Neolithic sites across the region. At Jerf el-Akhmar in Syria, monumental buildings were deliberately burned and buried. At the Ness of Brodgar in Scotland, massive stone structures were ritually closed around 2300 BC. At Çatalhöyük, a proto-city about 300 miles west of Göbekli Tepe, houses were regularly filled in and new homes built on top. This pattern suggested a cultural practice, a widespread belief system about the life cycle of sacred buildings. Some archaeologists have compared it to the concept of architectural death. Buildings, like people, were seen as having lifespans. They were born, constructed, lived, used, and died, decommissioned. And when they died, they needed proper burial. At Göbekli Tepe, artifacts were often specially arranged before the burial, what archaeologists call closing deposits or terminal deposits. Broken tools, animal bones, sometimes deliberately damaged objects, as if deactivating them, giving them to the site and its gods forever. One researcher described it poetically. I think of a rock star smashing a guitar on stage. The divine show is over. But here's where it gets even stranger. Not everyone agrees the burial was deliberate. In recent years, some archaeologists have challenged Schmidt's interpretation. Dr. Lee Clare, who took over as coordinator of the Göbekli Tepe project after Schmidt's death, has suggested that the fill might not have been intentional at all. Clare and his team point to evidence that some of the fill resulted from natural processes, building collapses, landslides triggered by earthquakes or heavy rainfall, and erosion from higher parts of the mound washing down into the enclosures. The rubble, they argue, is too chaotic, no clear patterns, no organized layering, no evidence of ritual placement. If this was a deliberate burial, where are the offerings? Where are the symbolic objects? Where is the structured deposit that would indicate intentional sanctification? The debate continues. But whether deliberate or natural, one thing is certain. The burial preserved Göbekli Tepe in remarkable condition, waiting patiently beneath the earth for 10,000 years, until Klaus Schmidt recognized its true significance. And that preservation may be the key to understanding what the site actually represents. Because when you examine the symbolism on those pillars, especially Pillar 43, the vulture stone, a disturbing pattern emerges. Vultures, scorpions, snakes, a headless human figure, a large bird in flight, wings outstretched. These aren't random decorations. They're telling a story. The vulture has long been associated with death, a carrion bird that feeds on the dead. In ancient cultures across the Near East, vultures played a role in sky burials, where bodies were left exposed for birds to consume, allowing the soul to ascend to the heavens. At Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists have found fragmented human skulls showing evidence of deliberate modification, carved, drilled, and pierced so they could be hung and displayed. This suggests a skull cult, possibly related to ancestor worship or ritual practices involving the dead. The prevalence of vulture imagery, combined with the abundance of vulture bones found at the site, points to excarnation rituals, exposing the dead to scavenging birds. But Pillar 43 might represent something more than just mortuary practices. It might depict a cosmic event, a catastrophe that changed everything. In 2017, researchers Martin Sweatman and Dimitrios Tsakritsis published their analysis of Pillar 43, arguing that the animals carved on it correspond to constellations in the night sky. Using astronomical software, they reconstructed what the sky would have looked like at different points in history and matched the pillar's imagery to a specific date, 10,950 BC. That date aligns almost perfectly with the Younger Dryas impact event, a hypothesized comet strike that triggered a sudden, dramatic cooling period lasting over 1,000 years. Evidence for this impact has been mounting. Multiple research teams have found nanodiamonds, iridium-enriched magnetic grains, and elevated platinum levels in sediment layers dating to the onset of the Younger Dryas. These are all markers of a cosmic impact. If a comet or asteroid struck Earth around 10,950 BC, the consequences would have been catastrophic. Massive wildfires, atmospheric dust blocking sunlight, global cooling, and the extinction of numerous megafauna species, woolly mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats. For humans, it would have been apocalyptic. And Sweatman and Tsakritsis believe Pillar 43 is a memorial to that event, a warning carved in stone telling future generations this happened. Remember, the German Archaeological Institute, which oversees Göbekli Tepe excavations, has pushed back hard against this interpretation. Jens Nottroff, an archaeologist working at the site, points out that Sweatman's theory requires several huge assumptions. 1. That modern constellations existed 12,000 years ago. 2. That Neolithic people in Turkey saw the same star patterns as ancient Greeks. 3. That the Younger Dryas impact event actually happened, which is still debated. Nottroff also notes that Sweatman conveniently ignored details that don't fit his theory, like the fact that the headless human on Pillar 43 has an erect phallus, hardly a symbol of death and destruction. So who's right? The truth is, we don't know. Göbekli Tepe's symbolism remains largely undeciphered. We can see the carvings. We can marvel at their artistry. But what they meant to the people who created them, that knowledge is lost. What we do know is this. Göbekli Tepe was built at a pivotal moment in human history. The Younger Dryas period, whether caused by a comet or natural climate shifts, was a time of dramatic change. Hunter-gatherer populations faced resource scarcity. Megafauna went extinct. The world became colder, harsher. And in the aftermath, something remarkable happened. Agriculture emerged. Permanent settlements appeared. Pottery was invented. Writing developed. Civilization as we know it began. Göbekli Tepe sits right at that boundary, built in the Old World, buried in the New World. Maybe it was a memorial to what was lost. Maybe it was a plea to the gods for survival. Maybe it was a sacred center where scattered groups gathered to preserve and pass on knowledge. Or maybe, and this is the theory that really makes archaeologists uncomfortable, it was something else entirely. Maybe the knowledge displayed at Göbekli Tepe didn't originate with the hunter-gatherers who built it. Maybe it was transferred to them. Chapter 4. What lies beneath? In September 2023, archaeologists working at Karahan Tepe, a site just 35 kilometers east of Göbekli Tepe, made a stunning discovery. They unearthed a massive statue, a seated human figure, 7 feet 6 inches tall, holding his phallus with both hands. The figure's ribs and fingers were marked with deep, incised lines, and around his neck was a distinctive V-shaped collar, the same motif found on other sculptures in the region, including the famous Urfa man. Next to the statue sat a carved vulture, wings spread, watching over the stone chamber. The chamber itself was oriented approximately 20 degrees east of north, aligned with the star Deneb in the constellation Cygnus, the same constellation that appears to dominate the astronomical orientation at Göbekli Tepe. Karahan Tepe isn't an isolated site. It's part of something bigger. Over the past decade, archaeologists have identified at least 12 similar sites in the region, all dating to the same period, all featuring T-shaped pillars, megalithic architecture, and sophisticated carvings. They're called the Taş Tepeler, the Stone Hills, and together they suggest something extraordinary. A unified culture spanning hundreds of square kilometers, with shared symbolism, shared architectural knowledge, and shared religious practices. Professor Necmi Karul, who leads excavations at Karahan Tepe, has found no evidence of agriculture at his site either. They are hunter-gatherers, he confirmed, and then they start to produce life. They change the building, they change the technology. We can call it a revolution. A revolution. But revolutions don't come from nowhere. They require catalysts. And this is where the story gets uncomfortable for mainstream archaeology, because when you look at the sheer sophistication of Göbekli Tepe and the Taş Tepeler sites, a disturbing question emerges. Where's the evolution? Where are the earlier, cruder versions? Where are the trial and error experiments? Where's the learning curve? Göbekli Tepe appears fully formed. No prototypes, no primitive predecessors, just sudden, astonishing mastery of monumental architecture, advanced carving techniques, and geometric planning. Gil Hakle and Avi Gopher, the archaeologists who discovered the geometric pattern linking Göbekli Tepe's three main enclosures, wrote, "Göbekli Tepe reflects a foreign country, a quantum jump of the latest hunter-gatherers in the region, a wild growth, a disorder of sorts in the hunting-gathering world, way beyond the capacity of a pristine hunter-gatherer society. Way beyond the capacity." This is where alternative researchers like Graham Hancock see an opening. Hancock has spent decades arguing for a controversial theory, that an advanced civilization existed during the Ice Age, was destroyed by the Younger Dryas catastrophe, and that survivors of this civilization transferred their knowledge to hunter-gatherers around the world. Göbekli Tepe, in Hancock's view, is evidence of that knowledge transfer. You can't just wake up one morning with no prior skills, no prior knowledge, no background in working with stone and create something like Göbekli Tepe. Hancock argues, there has to be a long history behind it, and that history is completely missing. Mainstream archaeologists hate this theory. They point out that there's no direct evidence of an Ice Age civilization. No cities, no metallurgy, no writing, just speculation built on gaps in the archaeological record. But Hancock's critics also can't fully explain Göbekli Tepe within the conventional model. They offer frameworks. Maybe hunter-gatherers were smarter than we thought. Maybe communal religious fervor motivated them. Maybe the archaeological record is incomplete. All of which might be true, but none of which fully answers the question, how? Göbekli Tepe shouldn't exist, and yet it does. And it's not just Göbekli Tepe. Similar impossible sites appear around the world, also dating to the end of the last Ice Age. Gunung Padang in Indonesia, a massive megalithic site possibly 20,000 years old. Poverty Point in Louisiana, a sophisticated earthwork complex built by hunter-gatherers. The Sphinx in Egypt. Erosion patterns suggest it might be far older than traditionally dated. Are these all independent developments? Or is there a pattern we're not seeing? Professor Necmi Karul, when asked about the sudden appearance of such sophistication at Karahan Tepe, said something fascinating. He called it a revolution in ideas. Not agriculture first, then civilization. Ideas first, then everything else. What if Göbekli Tepe and the Taş Tepeler represent the moment when humanity made a cognitive leap, when symbolic thought abstract reasoning, and complex social organization suddenly crystallized. Maybe the real mystery isn't who built Göbekli Tepe. It's why they felt compelled to build it at all. Schmidt himself believed Göbekli Tepe was fundamentally religious, a sacred center where different groups gathered to perform rituals, share stories, and connect with something larger than themselves. The architecture, the carvings, the astronomical alignments, all of it was designed to create a sense of awe, to bridge the gap between the earthly and the cosmic. And maybe that shared spiritual experience, that communal effort, was the spark that ignited civilization. Or maybe it was a response to trauma. If the Younger Dryas impact event really happened, survivors would have witnessed unimaginable devastation. Firestorms consuming forests, the sky darkening, temperatures plummeting, entire species vanishing. In the aftermath, scattered groups of survivors might have come together, pooling their knowledge, building a monument to ensure the catastrophe would never be forgotten. Göbekli Tepe as a memorial, Göbekli Tepe as a warning, Göbekli Tepe as a repository of knowledge for future generations. Today, only about 10% of Göbekli Tepe has been excavated. The other 90% remains buried beneath the hill, waiting. Ground-penetrating radar shows dozens more structures, more enclosures, more pillars, more carvings. And beyond Göbekli Tepe, the other Taş Tepeler sites are just beginning to be explored. Karahan Tepe alone covers an area 3 times larger than the excavated portion of Göbekli Tepe, and archaeologists have barely scratched the surface. What will they find? More evidence of sophisticated astronomy? More hints of lost knowledge? More questions without answers? Klaus Schmidt never got to see what lay beneath the other 95% of the site he discovered. He died in 2014, his life's work unfinished. But his legacy endures, because Göbekli Tepe changed everything. It forced us to reconsider our assumptions about prehistory, about the capabilities of ancient peoples, about the origins of civilization itself. And the more we dig, the more mysterious it becomes. Göbekli Tepe sits at the edge of human memory, a monument from a time before writing, before cities, before kings, a time when the line between hunter-gatherers and something more complex blurred into something we can't quite define. Was it the first temple, or the last monument of a forgotten age? Were its builders primitive tribes taking their first steps toward civilization? Or the descendants of something far older, preserving knowledge from a world that had already ended? We may never know for certain, but standing on that dusty hilltop in Turkey, staring at those massive T-shaped pillars carved with animals that haven't walked the earth in 10,000 years, one thing becomes clear. History is far stranger than we ever imagined. And somewhere beneath that hill, buried under tons of rubble and millennia of silence, the rest of the story is waiting to be told.